All right, folks, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the Biden administration approved a controversial bill to drill in Alaska, despite campaign promises of not approving any more oil projects due to climate change concerns. Now, this project could produce up to 280 million metric tons of carbon emissions, which would equate to 9.2 million metric tons of carbon emissions per year. Now, many petitions with hundreds of thousands of signatures were submitted, and numerous comments were made on social media posts asking for people to speak up against the project. Former government officials said that the administration was bound by the leasing contract to approve of the proposal or else face a potential $5 billion lawsuit for breach of contract. Other factors that might have influenced the decision was an energy crisis and a looming election. However, did President Biden lose the younger vote with campaign climate change promises broken? We're going to find out on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is a podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. Unfortunately, the action that we took and that many of us had taken to sign petitions, to reach out to local politicians, state politicians, federal politicians, to say, hey, we don't want the Willow Project. It's more than just being in Alaska. It's more than just drilling for oil in that one particular place. This is a bigger thing. It's going to affect the entire world and not just Alaska. Now, many of the proponents that wanted to put this in place and get it approved, like a lot of the House of, or I guess the congressmen or congresspeople in Alaska, one including a Democrat, said, hey, this is going to be good for our state. It's going to provide like 2,500 jobs. It's going to keep people employed. It's going to bring in money for the state through taxes. This is going to be fun. It's going to build infrastructure. This is going to be good for the state of Alaska. And for some reason, the Biden administration was like, hey, we're going to approve this. You know, this follows everything. We can't really go against it because of a couple of things. Mostly looks like due to a lawsuit. Now, this lawsuit has to do with the way the lease contract was structured. So apparently, ConocoPhillips, who is the proponent, who is the oil and gas company that wants to drill, they lease out contracts. So they lease out, particular areas of Alaska. Sometimes it's on land, which in this particular case it's on land. Sometimes it's outside, like it's in the ocean. So they have these leasing plots that they lease out. We probably heard a lot of it when Trump was president. You know, Canada does it too, but when Trump was president, he opened up the leasing sale. And not many leases were bought and purchased because the companies were like, no, we don't need to. We don't need to do that. We have enough oil and gas, or what, for whatever reason they didn't. Kind of backfired on Trump, but the leasing plot that ConocoPhillips had for this area, the Willow Project, was in play, and they wanted to put it through during the Trump administration, as we mentioned in our last episode, which was, I believe, was 1428. Episode 1428 with the Willow Project. And you'll get that. That's where we interview someone from from CAP, the Center of American Progress. And so she talked about, the different ways how this project could go wrong and how this project would be bad for, Alaska, for the world, for the climate change and everything. But this particular lawsuit has to do with, leasing plots. And so what happens is a company will lease a plot of land, in this case, and then they can drill on it. They would have to propose a drilling project, which they did here. Now, apparently a federal, so the government, so they're going to sue the government, this was, let me look it up here. So the lawsuit was, the ConocoPhillips could sue for $5 billion because the lawsuit allowed them to put a proposal together. And they put in so much money and they did a number of things to ensure that the proposal would go through, that if they didn't get it to go through, the leasing contract could allow for, or broken of that breach of contract could open up to the government to a $5 billion lawsuit. And that was one of the biggest reasons why they didn't go through with it, or they approved the project, according to some experts. The other two things were, hey, there's an energy crisis. Gas is really expensive. And until gas goes down, the U.S. wants to be doesn't want to be dependent on other states or other countries on oil and gas, because that's what happens, right? That's what everybody's saying with the war in the Ukraine and Russia increasing or reducing the amount of flow of oil, OPEC reducing the amount of flow of oil and gas, and here we are with higher gas prices around North America and around the world. And so there's a bit of an energy crisis, and so they want to bring money down and make the people who drive gas-powered vehicles, which is most of the population, happier because they don't have to pay for higher gas prices. That seems to be a major part of the election is gas prices. It'll be a major issue, this energy crisis and gas prices, in any election coming up. And so with an election coming up in 2024, the Biden administration is a little concerned about what's going to happen. That's what people are saying. This isn't coming from the Biden administration by any means. So with these three things, a potential lawsuit, the energy crisis, election coming up and looming, the Biden administration says, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to approve it, but we don't like it. Apparently Biden was like, I don't really want to do this. This is something that, this goes against our campaign promises of not putting through any kind of oil or not approving any kind of oil and gas project. So, okay, now you've said that, but you're going to approve this anyway. Now, there were restrictions added to the project. So instead of 5 drilling sites, they reduced it to 3. ConocoPhillips agreed to return 68,000 acres of the drilling area. And the Biden administration said it would place new protections for nearby coastal wetlands that is part of the Chesapeake Lake. I hope I pronounced that properly. Which they said would essentially be a firewall that would prevent expansion of the project. Now, if you remember in the last episode, when Jen was on the podcast, we talked about the expansion potential. There's a huge potential for expansion. This is not, apparently there was a conversation that ConocoPhillips had with shareholders saying this initial proposal is just the beginning. They're looking to expand the size of the drilling sites, the size of the area that they're going to drill, and so this is going to be a long-term project. So hopefully the fact that it's going to be, this area is going to be protected, this wetland will hopefully stop this expansion from happening. They're also going to designate, the Biden administration is going to designate 2.8 million acres of the Beaufort Sea in the Arctic as off limits for future oil and gas leasing. And the Interior Department plans to issue new rules to block oil and gas leases on more than 13 million of the 23 million acres that form the petroleum reserve. However, and this is a big caveat, several of those measures that I just read out to you could be revoked by a future administration. So let's say the Republicans win the presidential race and there's a new president coming up in 2024. There's a good chance that they're going to remove some, if not all, of those restrictions that I just read out to you. So everything that the Biden administration says they want to protect, even though they approved, it's like approved with these little caveats, these restrictions, all of a sudden another president can come through and be like, nope, it's not done. Like, we can take it all off and we can continue to drill for oil, and we'll expand it back to 5 sites. They can do whatever they want. And so these restrictions, although good for the short term, are meaningless. And this is what happens when you hear of presidents, the administrations, Congress people, any kind of politician that are planning their sort of bills and proposals based on a 4-year rotating cycle, basically on an election cycle, right? So as you get closer to the election, you don't do as many controversial things or riskier bills that you may want to have done when you initially campaigned. But once you get that second term, then you can open it up. But you have to get that second term, right? You got to be able to say, hey, I can actually do this, and I can do Obamacare, or I can do something else, or I can, put together all these marine protected areas to form a legacy like President Bush did, back in the early 2000s. So a lot of these things are really bad. Now, environmental groups are not sitting down. They're not lying down and letting the government sort of bulldoze them. There is a plan I believe it was by EcoJustice, mentioned in the article that I saw in the New York Times. A federal environmental, which I'll link in the show notes. It says a federal environmental review that found they're going to sue, as the government should have denied the permit based on a federal environmental review that found substantial concerns about the project's impact on climate, danger to freshwater resources, and threats to migratory birds, caribou, whales, polar bears, and other animals. So there's a lawsuit coming because the government, a lot of environmental groups and a lot of people think that the government should have stopped it based on those reasons. So impact on climate, the project's impact on climate change, or on climate, danger to freshwater resources, and threats to migratory birds, caribou, whales, polar bears, and other animals. Now, a lot of people say that the energy crisis stuff is BS. There's enough oil from around the world, so it's not a supply issue. It's actually a demand issue. So what people are trying to figure out is, how can we substitute the demand with alternative energies and technologies, right? So the 280 million metric tons that I mentioned of carbon that will be emitted from this project, that's estimated, is essentially like putting 2 million cars on the road. That's the amount of carbon emissions that will come out of that. And that's a lot. That's a lot of carbon. That's a lot of emissions. We can't afford any more emissions. That's what this whole thing is about, is the fact that the administration came in campaigning to a lot of younger people who said, hey, we're going to do something about climate change. We're going to reduce climate change. We're going to put the most comprehensive climate bill that the U.S. has ever seen. We're going to put that and we're going to pass it. And we're not going to agree or approve any other, oil and gas projects. No more fossil fuel projects. Okay, great. And then within 3 years, they do the same thing, right? They do the opposite. They put the climate bill in, and then when it comes time to approve this, it's like an exception to the rule. It's like, oh, no, we can do this. Well, why do we need to do this? Do we really need to do this? Or should we be putting our money elsewhere? I don't really know, to be honest. I am not sure. I don't like the fact that there's another oil and gas site that'll be drilled, 3 sites instead of 5, potentially more later on down the road. It doesn't make sense for us to do this, but the Biden administration chooses to do this, even though we know how much trouble we're in. And I also find it interesting with the $5 billion lawsuit. It's $5 billion. It's a lot of money. There's no doubt about that. But how much more money are we going to pay due to the consequences of climate change? We're talking trillions here. So is $5 billion really worth the risk? I don't know. I really don't know. I'd love for you to tell me. I don't think it is. I think we should risk paying the $5 billion in lawsuits, because you're going to be paying more due to the amount of carbon that's going to be emitted and the fact that climate change is not going to be reduced as much as we thought. We're actually putting more carbon into the atmosphere than taking out. And that's just with the base plan. We haven't even talked about the real plan yet that ConocoPhillips shared with its shareholders. That's where we're at. So again, politicians are showing their true colors, promising one thing and then doing the opposite. It's really disappointing. It's frustrating. There's a lot of anger online. The TikTok community, which is a younger community, came out, spoke up against, the Willow Project. We tried to get our own little thing going here on the podcast. A lot of other podcasts were talking about it. YouTube videos were going on about it. And so there's a lot of people here who are aware of the Willow Project. My daughter was angry, frustrated when she found out that they were approved. She's away now, but she was texting me, it's like, why did they approve this? And I had to tell her, I have no idea. I had to tell my 15-year-old daughter, I have no idea why they approved this. For greed, for money, short-term jobs. And this happens over and over and over again. So we need to continue to fight these projects. Just like Jen said, we need to continue to fight these projects one at a time and make sure that, we support organizations like the Center of American Progress, like EcoJustice, and to say, we're not going to take this anymore, right? This has to stop. These rules where these oil companies can put in and, with the leases and say, hey, we're going to propose to drill, and they are allowed to drill, by threatening a lawsuit. And then we have to worry about that lawsuit, even though we know it's going to cost more to, repair any kind of damages from storm surges, from hurricane damage, from drought, from wildfires, from flooding, all this stuff is happening. How many trillions of dollars have we used to pay for that? That's just in the US. Imagine everywhere else, mudslides everywhere. Right? We need to wake up. We've been telling everybody for a while we need to wake up. And every time we do, it's talk is cheap. And we need to do more to figure this out. So I'd love to hear your reaction to this and what you think. You can hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean, all one word. Or you can go to speakupforblue.com. That's speakupforblue.com. I know I say it fast sometimes. And go to the Contact Us page, fill out the form. That goes right to my email directly, and I'll answer you when I can. But I want to thank you so much for listening to this. I want to thank you so much for your effort. It's not over. Support the companies in the article that I share, the organizations that are going after the government and going to sue the government to make sure this project doesn't get going, doesn't get started. So it's not over yet. We've lost the battle, but we could still win the war, right? And we need everybody. We need everybody to act, and we need everybody to speak up for this project, for Alaska, for the environment, for the atmosphere, for the planet, for the ocean. So I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of How to Protect the Ocean. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.